So this week we're talking nutrition and its effect or potential effect on fibromyalgia. So nourishment, fuel for health and growth, tasty, filling, energy. These are all the words that I would use or connect with nutrition. And you might have noticed that I haven't actually used the word food until just now. And that's because for me, food is secondary to nutrition. It might be that to be nourished correctly is actually to forego food for a little while, and that's how I think these days. And that thinking began around August last year, so August 2019, and it's organically developed into choosing the eating regimen that I shared with you last week in part 1. But I realised a couple of days ago when I was preparing to record today's film that my interest began actually back when I was in my early 20s. Now, I mentioned 2 or 3 weeks ago, in a vague way, that I was asked by a consultant in a hospital what my diet was like. And you may recall that when I answered that question, there was a bit of a pitiful response because there wasn't a great deal of green stuff in my diet at the time. And I'm going to stay vague about what was troubling me at that time health-wise. But what I did learn, and what I'm going to be quite specific in this film with, is that nutrition or food is medicine. It can be healing. That's what I learned from that episode back in my 20s. I'd lost a lot of weight at that time, and a good friend even said to me that, I looked like a 17-year-old boy. I was very thin, and my thighs were like sticks. And I don't know if you want to call it bloody-mindedness or pure inspiration. I really don't know what I looked to, because the internet wasn't I wasn't using the internet as widely back then as I do now. So something happened in my brain, something happened in my environment to prompt me to look at food at this time. I was on medication anyway. But I recalled the response of the consultant in regards to how I was eating, and I went to task in regards to how I was eating. I began eating great slabs of bread, wholemeal bread with butter and cheese for my breakfast. Dinner would be a vegetable stir fry on mackerel fish, meat and potatoes. At night time before bed, I'd have a great big mug of Horlicks laced with blackstrap molasses. It's a very nutritional food. In time, the weight went back on. I gained not just weight, but strength and vigour. The colour came back to my cheeks effectively. My hair began to grow strong and thick, to the extent that when I went back to the hospital, the consultant looked at me and he said it was a miracle. And I know that the way I started to eat had a massive impact, positive impact on my health. So in August last year, when I finally was diagnosed with fibro and I saw that my weight was at the highest it had ever been in my entire life, and that my blood pressure was a cause for concern, and there were a couple of other things I won't go into as well, I wondered if I could use food again. Sorry, that's my phone going. It's dentist actually. There. So I wondered if I could use food again to just get me better. I suppose I didn't think that it would. Maybe I hoped that it would, but I wasn't expecting at that time that eating differently, eating better, would rid me of fibro. But I was sure that it would have a positive impact, just as it had done in my 20s. So I felt at least I could explore the idea. As I'm leaving a voice message, I thought then I could explore the idea of using food. So now this time I have got the internet and I've got all sorts of research resources at my fingertips, and I tell you, I went to work. So, and it was fun as well. I thought it would be fun. I like doing research and things like that, and I'd always been into nutrition, as I kind of said. I have a dad who, well, he's dead now, but he he would always share information with the family about the miracles of vitamin C, or apple cider vinegar, or whatever it was, garlic, those sorts of things. Always natural methods to addressing a health concern rather than going to a doctor and getting a prescription and an armful of pills. So the first lady I honed in on is a lady called Barbara O'Neill. She is a health practitioner. I believe she began as a nurse, but don't quote me on that, but she's from Australia. I watched one of her videos initially. It was quite long. It was a lecture. It was about 50 minutes, possibly longer. Now, it was entitled True Cause of Disease, which I found really interesting. And I knew that she wasn't going to tell me that it's all due to lack of exercise and eating junk food. And indeed, I wasn't disappointed, because she talked about how the body can clean itself when given the opportunity, of course. And she was the first person I've been exposed to who really broke down what a detox both looks like and what it can do for the body. And I regularly do Barbara's detoxes. I've got one due for next Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday actually. And it's 3 days. Day 1 focuses on the antioxidants such as vitamin C, vitamin E, and vitamin B complex. Day 2 is about the proteins, and day 3 is all about fats. Barbara, in that initial lecture that I watched of hers, also talked about the use of salts and the necessity of water. She goes into a lot of things, as you can imagine. This lecture is close to an hour in length. I'm just trying to sum up the bits that I took from it and which I employ and use today. The thing that she talked about that really struck me was fasting, and she brought biblical principles in, and I am a believer, so that will obviously colour the way I respond to things and the sorts of things I will receive. So if you really are adamant that there's no God and you just don't want to hear anything scriptural, then you might not want to listen to Barbara, because she does pepper her lectures with references to scripture, and that really talks to me. I'll mention in a few moments other people that you could look to if you really don't want to hear scripture, but she's brilliant. She knows her onions, and she's very personable, and she does diagrams, and she really talks through her ideas, and she always has examples from real life from her clinics and her health retreat that back up what she's saying, and she always includes other research and science to give that dimension to what she's saying. So it's not just a case of when I think this, she really shows that she's done her research and she factors that in her lectures. So I trust her. I like what she has to say, and I believe her techniques are effective as well. So along with Barbara, there are other people that I've looked into, and I'll link Barbara's initial lecture that I've just mentioned. I'll link that in the description box below, and the other people that I'm about to mention as well. So next up would be Mindy Peltz. She's an American, and from her I've learned how the body reacts to food abstinence. And I'll link this in the description box. She has a particularly great video where she talks about the impact on the body hour by hour when one stops eating, and I found that fascinating. And I can't technically or scientifically prove any of this. All I can do is go anecdotally and say, since doing this, I've noticed this, to the cause and effect. So she talks a lot about inflammatory foods, poisons that come into the body, such as heavy metals, toxins, plastics. And she really goes to town on how the body, when we're not eating, can clean itself. Words like autophagy and ketosis, etc. You might have heard one or two of those before. I hope I'm not giving you too much or too little. Some of what she talks about overlaps actually with Barbara's teachings. What she does do is she shows that abstinence can help the body remove some of what I call these dirty squatters. Because as part of my research, I began to think, well, had I been exposed to heavy metals? I'd had metal fillings. I don't have them anymore. I haven't had one for about 25 years. I have private dentistry now, so I don't have any new metal fillings, but I still do have a couple from my teen years. Was it chemicals? You know, years and years ago, I haven't done it for about 30 years, but I used to have chemical treatments on my hair. I had acne for some time, and I used to have these treatments involved. I can't remember the exact way to describe it, but it was it's the fluorocarbons that you get sometimes in aerosols. It sounds hideously toxic now I think about it, but that was used in the treatment I used to get for my acne, and I just thought, oh my gosh, is that it? Have I been eating inflammatory foods, foods that are carcinogenic? Is it me? Is it what I've been exposed to, what I've eaten that has given me this condition? So for me, Mindy Pelz really goes into how not eating can help eliminate any of these poisons that have invariably come into our bodies through the environment. It can just be used to clean the body out. Another person I've listened to is Sten Ekberg, and he's a European now living in the States. He explains the role of insulin, which you might remember I briefly touched on in my first film, I think, where I told you that in my family we do have history of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and he talks about insulin and how it can actually have an impact on our weight, disrupt our hormones generally. And he really shows how not eating can reset our insulin, give us insulin resistance, to stop burning sugar and start burning fat by not eating. So he's another person I've looked into. Others that I've tapped into, and I just don't go anywhere near them at the moment because I don't need to. I'm settled with where I am. Jason Fong, he talks about food abstinence from a sort of weight loss diabetes perspective. Thomas Lauer, he's a young man who mainly looks at keto and food abstinence for strength and fitness and building himself up, and he lost a lot of weight by fasting. Eric Berg, he has a lot of short films on keto, very specific films. I've watched a few of his. And then Françoise Bouquin-Wilhelmy, she approaches fasting from a very scientific perspective. I would say if you don't want to hear the scriptural references that Barbara O'Neill will invariably include in her lectures, and I'm glad that she does, then I would say go to Françoise Bouquin-Wilhelmy. Scientific, anecdotal stories, stories of success and outcomes from her two health retreats. So I would go maybe to her first, but I'll link all these people in the description box below. So where did I go after doing my research and finding out some things from these people, particularly from Barbara? Well, what I did was I immediately did a detox, a 3-day detox. I've already described the content of that, so I won't go into that much more. And what I did was started to shift the time that I had breakfast. So I would typically get breakfast into me by about 8:15. So I'd leave the house, drive to work with nothing but some water, and as soon as I got into the office I'd eat, and then I'd have lunch, then I'd have dinner, and I have my snacks in between, such as I described last week. What I started to do was shift when I had breakfast, so I just shifted by an hour and then a bit later. So now I'm using the regimen that I taught you last week, and as I say, I am convinced that it's helping me massively. I'm almost at the point now, and I'll go into this in another film, where I'm thinking I might just take myself off the amitriptyline, so I'm feeling so much better. So nutrition, and we're not just talking about food, we're also talking, I'm also talking about the refraining from food. It's not just what we eat, it's what we don't eat, and when we don't, the periods that we don't eat, and how long we allow ourselves to go without eating so that our bodies can actually recover. I have a feeling that for some of us, maybe I was one of these people once upon a time, if I didn't sleep, I'd probably be eating around the clock because I was a real nibbler, a real grazer. And now, by only eating 2 meals a day, and on Monday 1 meal a day, I feel so much better. And I love food, and I get to enjoy food, but food from the perspective of nutrition. Not just all my veggies and an absence of pizza and ice cream, but also those hours when I just don't eat and I give my body a break. I hope you've enjoyed watching. See the description box below for all the people I've mentioned, and stay strong. Speak to you soon.